yes, conduit is invaluable, and it will pay for itself over time. I mean, a lot of time, but
Mhm.
it just keeps the cable in better condition.
Awesome. Hey everyone, welcome back to another episode of the In the Trenches Roundtable. Today we're doing one of our installation focus episodes. We've got a fun topic on the table, not conduit, all things conduit. So of course we have our awesome panel of experts joining us. Hey everyone,
Hi.
excited to jump into this. So today again we're going to be discussing conduit, and I'll start with the first question, and this should be an interesting one. What is conduit?
Conduit is it's a form of raceway. It's something that's used to house and protect wiring of some variety, electrical or otherwise. Is that Gil, Cal?
Protect and group together. So yeah,
Mm,
it's like tubing that kind of houses the cable pathways and protects and groups it together. Used for high voltage stuff and low voltage stuff. High voltage stuff,
mhm,
a little bit more frequently than ours. Low voltage stuff is more of a application based, like
mhm.
here versus here, where high voltage electrical work, it's used everywhere.
This will be a
I
quick
guess it's
video.
distinct from raceway in that it's fully enclosed. Like a raceway could be just like a tray or some sort of like pathway, whereas conduit is going to be fully enclosed.
All right, so we'll move right on to our next question. What is conduit made of? Are there like different types of conduit, or?
So it's all types except for the type like Micah just mentioned, like Panduit or Raceway or whatever. That's going to be plastic, but the other types, all have metal in its makeup, I guess. So like EMT, is it electrical metal tubing or something? Is it?
Electrical metallic tubing.
Yeah, metallic tubing. Yep. So that's like solid metal, like a stalk of solid metal
Mm,
tubing in 10-foot increments. There's flex conduit or flexible metal conduit, which is like rubber with like a metal kind of ring that goes around it for rigidity. That's a little bit more like flexible or malleable, bend it to the position or angles that you'd like. But yeah, plastic, metal, rubber, different types of materials used to make it.
PVC is often referred to as conduit. Is it technically a form of conduit as well?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely.
So I'm assuming the type of conduit you would use would depend on what's going inside of it.
More so on what is outside of it and what's going to affect it from the outside. I mean, obviously
Mm,
anything like high voltage, like bare copper stuff needs to go in EMT, like metal conduit. But the type of conduit that you use in our low voltage field is more like where it's going to be installed, like what it's susceptible to, what's going to affect the cable, or like sunlight, weather, wind, dust, workers, people, traffic, yeah, different applications, different areas that you install it kind of determine more so than what it's protecting, if that makes sense.
gotcha. To help me understand a little bit better, like where we would use conduit, can we walk through some examples of common places conduit is used?
Often we'll use it on the exterior of building just from a simple safety concern. If you're running cable on the outside of a building within sort of arm reach, I think we've referred to it as the SWAT zone in previous videos. We'll often put that in conduit to keep people from coming up and just clipping the wire. And
Mm,
thereby compromising the video. So in that situation, it's less about protecting it from weather or elements or longevity of the cable, and it's more about human interference.
gotcha. So outside of buildings, and then the type of conduit depends on the environment. That makes sense.
And why
Um,
you're using it. So if you're
and
trying
why
to
here's
protect it from human tampering, maybe you don't want to use flex because it's a little easier to cut through. You want to use EMT.
mm,
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, so PVC that you referred to earlier, that's something that we're mainly going to use in like an underground application. Like if we're,
Hmm.
running, to a camera that we're going to mount on a pole in a parking lot somewhere across, a grass or, dirt area, trenching, PVC is kind of underground. That's where we typically use that in low voltage stuff. Now the outside of building, EMT or flex, usually the Panduit or raceway that Micah mentioned earlier, that's more interior, hallways, offices, stuff like that.
Could you expand on, when we're running cable underground, there is such a thing as direct burial cable that is designed to be directly buried. Why would someone go to the extra expense of putting PVC in the ground in addition to that?
Longevity and protection of the cable. I mean, if you have your exposed direct burial cabling, you're susceptible to digging, people with shovels or track hose, whatever equipment, anytime that they have to like penetrate the surface of the ground, your cable is that much more vulnerable. If you add the PVC to it, you're not only protecting it from somebody digging or somebody cutting it with some type of machinery, it also helps it with moisture and stuff too. I mean, the direct burial stuff will last longer than just regular riser cable underground, but it does degrade over time too. So
are animals a concern? I've heard people talk about creatures chewing through cable.
I've seen that several times. Not so much underground cable though, because I guess when the dirt, fill it back in, it's kind of tightly compacted, so really worms
and
and
I used to
like
talk to the moles in my garden.
Yeah, groundhogs, whatever you got, maybe, but yeah, definitely not. That's more so like when you're running through like attics or crawl spaces or something like that. That's when you really have to worry about like
rats and mice, yeah,
and, all that, squirrels, whatever.
Awesome. Heck yeah. Are there common places that you can source conduit from, or is there specific places that we source it from?
Yeah, I mean, there's definitely a ton of different places you can get it from. I mean, all the way from like Home Depot or Lowe's or a home improvement store or whatever. They have their electrical section and they sell stocks. But if you're buying a bunch, definitely go through like a electrical supply store or something like that. They'll give you a better per foot or per stock cost than a reseller would or a home improvement store would.
Makes sense.
Can we talk about for a second, like there are very specific situations where it's absolutely required, i.e. like there's code and building code requirements for having it in certain spaces. But outside of that, when you're making kind of a judgment call about whether to use it or whether not to use it, why don't you always say yes? If it's going to add that extra protection and it'll keep people from cutting your wires, etc., why don't you always use conduit?
It'd be a couple of reasons. Cost being one of the big ones. I mean, the more conduit you use on a job, the higher the labor cost is going to be, because it takes so much more time to install it, to support it, to bend it. That's another thing too. That's kind of an elevated skill set that not every technician knows how to do or is completely skilled or proficient at. So there's only as far as high voltage electricians, that's something that they learn, when they're apprenticing. That's like they spend, a year just bending conduit and hanging conduit. But low voltage electricians, it's a little more few and far between, people that are extremely skilled at bending conduit and doing, lots like big conduit installations. That's usually people that you see that come from the electrical field, the high voltage field, into our field, and they just carry that skill with them.
So that labor is going to be more expensive by default.
Right. The labor is definitely going to be more expensive just because it takes more time, more materials, everything to install. And yeah, I mean, that's also what I hit on too. Like you gotta take your skill set and the technicians that you have at your disposal into account there. So if you've got a team of technicians, 4 or 5 technicians, that you have this big job and only one of them knows how to bend EMT, you might not want to quote 1,000 feet of it, because that one guy is going to be doing it all. If there are areas where you can sub EMT for something like Flex or Panduit Raceway, that definitely
would that apply to me if I'm tackling the project from a DRI perspective as well, and I know I need some additional protection for that conduit, that cabling, but I can't bend EMT? What are some of my workarounds? You mentioned Flex.
Yeah, that's what I would definitely recommend on the DIY end. Flexible conduit, you don't really sacrifice much in terms of like, protection or susceptibility to like being cut or vandalized. It is able to be cut now. It just takes, so you have to do it intentionally. You're not just gonna like, cut it by
Accidentally.
accident. You have to like have
Yeah.
like a sawzall and a blade and like intentionally cut it. So it's still going to provide that protection that you're looking for, but like I said, it's malleable. You can kind of choose your own pathway, or the lines that you want to run it along with your supports, and bend it with your hands, as opposed to buying separate tools. And so for EMT to bend it, you have to have a separate conduit bender for each separate size of EMT. So you have like a 1/2 inch bender, a 3/4 inch bender, an inch bender. And when you get up to like 2 inches, you that's when you can't physically, well, I can't physically do it because it's you got to be really strong to do that. But that's when you get to like hydraulic benders, and those are extremely expensive.
Oof.
Yeah.
So you just
How
said
does
something
the
there.
oh, sorry.
It's okay. It's okay. You want to be host,
Rock
Micah?
leather can do that bend.
No, I'm sorry.
No, it's okay. It's all
I was
right.
curious about the cost difference between Flex and EMT. Is Flex more expensive on a material level?
Not much. I mean, I don't have those exact numbers like per foot of like the average cost of EMT for the average cost of Flex. But the things that you use to like connect and support Flex conduit are cheaper than the things that you would use to connect and support EMT, because they're made out of plastic and not metal.
Makes sense. I was going to ask about different sizes. You mentioned a few different sizes there, conduit.
Yeah.
How does that factor into your decision on using conduit?
Phil.
So the electrical code states like a fill ratio that you're supposed to have for conduit. And so the more cables that you're going to have in that specific segment of conduit, the larger it needs to be.
Yeah, you can't fill it. You can't pack it 100% full. There's a certain amount of additional space that's required per the code. And there's complicated tables that actually show you, like, if it's this type of cabling, you need this, you can put this many in to this type of conduits. They do all the calculations for you.
Well, I mean, it's a pain to like run new conduit segments for cable pathways just to add like one more cable or something like that. I can't tell you how many times I've gone to like service something that someone else installed, and I'll take off the plate of the junction box or something, and I'll find like the conduit is absolutely packed to the brim, and they're using like cable lube to pull cable through the conduit and just fit one more in and one more in, and then gets to the point where you can't even service that conduit anymore because you can't pull new cable in or remove old cable. It's very, very important to follow that fill ratio.
Yeah, that makes sense. Is there like a standard size that somebody either DIYing, or maybe they're not DIYing, but they're looking into conduit that might be needed on their building or facility? Is there a standard size that they could look at, or not really? It really just depends.
I mean, 1/2 or 3/4 or 1 inch. I mean, I don't think for anything DIY or residential based you'd ever need more than a 1 inch conduit for low voltage Ethernet cabling, unless you
have a crap ton of cameras, I guess.
Right, unless you have like 40 cameras on your house or something. You might need a bigger conduit then, but definitely 1 inch and under for residential DIY, like 10 and under camera systems.
Definitely.
Gil, I'm curious, because you've been in this industry a while. Have you seen the usage of conduit and the low voltage application change?
As security has changed, yes, because people want more secure applications, which means the cable needs to be covered. It can't be exposed. So, I mean, there's a lot of talk about how conduit really helps, but it's a hard sell for some reason. I think we have that discussion a lot with customers and clients and just people in general. They're like, well, it sounds great, yeah, give me that, and then you give them the price, and it's like, oh, well, how do we cut this in half? Well, we get rid of the conduit.
Conduit could cut the cost of a run in half.
Yeah. So that's always it. I mean, I think from our perspective, we would always love to use conduit because we know it's a much more secure application for the system. But it's a hard sell sometimes when people are on budgets, of course. And Conduit can blow budgets out of water for sure, especially for a low voltage project. I mean, but like I think Flex. You mentioned why don't we just use Flex all the way around? Well, it is more expensive, and because it is flexible, you have to have anchors more often. So you don't want to have like a whole bunch of anchors going along the building. It's just easier to have a 10-foot stick with 1 or 2 anchors. And then
it's also an aesthetic difference in that too. Like it doesn't look as
also
nice.
And then the beauty of it for people that aren't conduit vendors is, Cal mentioned junction boxes. In the electrical world, they call them LBs or line boxes. But those are the little things that make you allow, that turn a horizontal into a vertical and allow you to, pull the cable through and give you kind of a junction to pull cable out and push it in a different direction. And like Cal said before, easy to see overloaded conduit once you open that box up, because you'll see where people don't really apply the purpose of using conduit fill calculators. You know what I mean? There's a reason for that. One of the biggest reasons is that it's really hard to do turns and 90s and direction shifts because cable just doesn't want to go where you want it to go necessarily unless it's a straight line. So those conduit fill calculators are really important.
And the line boxes also have fill requirements on them
LBs,
too.
you see LBs on just about everything. People don't even realize it. They'll see these little funky little boxes, and they just kind of make it go like that, And it's got a little door on it. And you open the door, and you'll see all kinds of cables coming through. And usually a string. And Cal will probably attest to this: is strings get pulled in, but they bind up everything. So then people try to put more cable in it, and the string's all wrapped around in there. So yeah, just little funky things you kind of go through when you're dealing with it. But conduit's always a better solution. Just got to find the budget for it.
Definitely. I want to circle back to earlier. We talked about when we should use conduit, and we said outside applications. Does that mean like every exposed exterior cable should have conduit?
In a perfect world, yeah, absolutely. From our perspective, as far as like bidding the project or supporting the project and troubleshooting when things go down, like yes, conduit is invaluable, and it will pay for itself over time. I mean, a lot of time, but it just keeps the cable in better condition. Now, say you had a DIY application or a residential application, and you decided to just run, bare cable along the side of your house. It's going to be susceptible to the elements. It's going to be susceptible to sun, UV damage too. Like that's over, the course of 2-3 years, you're going to start seeing issues with that if you don't use conduit.
Yeah, I mean, that's for people that don't want to pay for conduit. That's what you're doing with outside cables, is you're hiding it. You're just, where can I stuff it? You know what I mean? Where can I run it in the soffit or somewhere? You know what I mean? It's not the best solution. Eventually, something's going to get to it, whether it's the environment, animals, or bad guys.
How does it connect to like the camera? How does the camera like?
Really good question. Really good question. Yeah, so you'd have, let's say if we're talking about EMT or just standard, like a metal conduit, you would have the stalk of conduit, then you would have some type of compression or box connector, like allows you to screw the end of the conduit into an electrical mounting box of the camera, and then the camera is mounted on the face of the electrical mounting box. Sometimes you'll even see them go a step further where it'll be conduit to compression or box connector, and then to like a junction box, like a conduit junction box, and then they mount the electrical mounting box to the face of the conduit junction box. But I mean, if you go to any electrical supply store, there's an unlimited amount of products that you can use to form different conduit pathways and connections. I mean, it's honestly, when I got into this industry, it was my favorite thing, because it's just a huge puzzle. Like, really, you have an idea in your head about how you want this, cable to get, from point A to point B and be protected, and then you have to go to an electrical supply store and find all the small pieces to make that happen. It's just a huge fun puzzle.
Your enthusiasm for Conduit has come out throughout this conversation.
Great.
Yes.
That's exactly what I wanted to happen.
Cal, the Conduit ambassador.
Conduit Cal.
Conduit Cal.
Not the worst nickname I've ever been given.
Not the worst nickname Gil has ever given you.
Yeah, or even any.
Anyway, yeah. That's really awesome. So we covered the 4 sections. Any final thoughts from our experts on Conduit?
Use it more. If you're an installer, suggest it more. Try to explain it better. Explain why the cost is worth it. If you're a DIYer, make part of your budget the security Conduit gives you. And for us, we always suggest it and always want to use it and always think it's important for our installs. And it's just a matter of getting the client to buy in when there's a cost difference. That's pretty much what I think.
And from the DIY perspective, I would say put yourself in like the cable's shoes, I guess, as weird as that sounds. Like, when you're choosing your pathways or whether or not to use which type of conduit, just think, okay, what's going to make this cable the most protected, last the longest, and not able to reach or cut or be damaged by the elements or people or animals or anything. Just put yourself in the cable shoes.
Definitely. Makes sense
Cable
too,
jail, right?
Say again?
It's cable jail.
Cable jail, yeah.
Cable jail. Love that. Love that. Well, that'll do it for this episode of the In the Trenches Roundtable. Really enjoy diving deep into the install services side of this business. So if you like these type of videos, let us know by smashing that like button, dropping some comments down in comments below. Let us know what we should talk about next in this segment. And tune in next week for our next episode of the In the Trenches. It'll be another fun one. All of the links to our conduit fill chart will be in the description below. Thanks again for tuning in. Really appreciate it. See y'all next week.
Yeah.